Hi everyone, it is officially 5:30 UK time, so I'm delighted to kick off what is the first IHR Digital History seminar of this autumn-winter term. So welcome to everybody. I'm going to be variously clicking, letting other people into the meeting. I think we've got quite a lot of people joining us today, which is fabulous, and we can, I'm sure, see why that's going to be happening. My name is not James Baker. James Baker is another convener of the IHR Digital History Seminar. My name is Alexandra Ortolja-Baird, and I will be luckily having the real privilege of chairing today's session. So, a little bit about the format of the seminar before I introduce our illustrious speakers for the evening. It's about an hour in total, about half an hour of presentation of our paper, and then about half an hour of questions, which means please feel free to put questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and speak into the digital void. When questions do come up, we welcome all forms of questions at the end of the presentation. You'll have noticed already that this is being recorded, so please do be aware of that. We will pause, of course, the recording when we come to the end of the session, but just to make everyone aware of that. So, without further ado, I do not want to take any more time here. I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful two speakers for the evening. So, the title of our paper for today is Digitising Death, Gender, Genealogy, and the Experimental Recovery of Women's Histories in Early Modern Ireland. And to introduce our speakers, I'll tell you a little bit about them. So, we start with Dr. Bronagh Anne McShane, who's a research fellow in history on the Voices Project at Trinity College, Dublin. Her research combines historical methods and AI technology to uncover the experiences of women living in 16th and 17th century Ireland. She's published extensively on women, gender, religion, and digital methods in journals like the British Catholic History, Archivium Hibernicum, and the Journal of Historical Network Research. She's joint guest editor of A New Agenda for Women's and Gender History in Ireland, Irish Historical Special Studies, special issue of 2022, co-editor of Brides of Christ, Women in Monasticism in Medieval and Early Modern Ireland, and contributor to Volume 1 of the Oxford History of British and Irish Catholicism. Her book, Irish Women in Religious Orders 1530 to 1700, Suppression, Migration, Reintegration, was joint winner of the National University of Ireland's 2023 Publication Prize in Irish History. For more, you can check out her bio on thevoicesproject.ie. Felix will also be joining us. Felix Vanden Borre, he is a research assistant on the Voices Project. His background is in early modern religious and cultural history and digital humanities. He's previously worked in research libraries and on a project deploying AI to interpret and classify visual communication during the German Reformation. Felix is especially interested in mixing traditional scholarship and innovative computational methods to advance historical research and archival discoverability. So on that note, I will stop sharing my screen, pass over to Felix and Bronagh, and look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I've just shared my screen there. Can you let me know that you're able to see it and everything is all good? Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the introduction. And I'd also like to extend our thanks to Professor James Baker, one of the co-conveners of the Digital History Seminar, for the very kind invitation to present at the seminar here this evening. And finally, thanks to you all online for joining us to discuss the most riveting topic of digitizing death at this late time of the evening. So it's a real pleasure for us to be here this evening to share some of our ongoing work for the project entitled Voices of Women in Early Modern Ireland 1550 to 1700, which is a 5-year ERC advanced grant funded project led by Professor Jane Allmeyer at Trinity College, Dublin, who I believe is joining us. So hello, Jane. We have just completed year 2 of what is a 5-year project. So what you'll see and hear about from us here today very much reflects work in progress and our exploratory endeavours rather than final or finished conclusions. So to give an overview of this evening's presentation structure, to begin, I'll start with a brief overview of the Voices Project and how we are using digital methods to tackle long-standing questions about visibility, silence, and representation in the early modern archive. Then I'll introduce one of our main archival case studies, which are the funeral entries, an incredibly rich, but really as yet underused manuscript source. I will then pass over to my colleague Felix, who will explain how we're processing this manuscript collection using AI and named entity recognition in order to make it searchable and analyzable, and what we're learning from that ongoing work in progress. We'll then wrap up with some final reflections on the technological and historiographical challenges which this kind of digital work raises, and what they might tell us about the evolving relationship between history, gender, data, and interpretation. So to begin then, the Voices project team, as you will see here on screen, is a highly interdisciplinary one, bringing together historians, digital humanists, and computer scientists to explore what happens when we place digital methods in conversation with early modern archives. Pictured on screen is the team as it currently stands, and I would like to take this opportunity to explicitly thank our computer science colleague, Dr. Diego Rincon-Llanes, who has been instrumental in supporting the NER experiments, which Felix will discuss later on. The central aim of the Voices project then is to recover the lived experiences of ordinary non-elite women in Ireland between 1550 and 1700, a period that was characterised by phases of bitter warfare, religious conflict, colonisation, and displacement. Adopting a cross-denominational and multi-ethnic perspective, the project examines the lives of women from the full spectrum of religious and ethnic communities that populated early modern Ireland. And an important point to note here is that early modern Ireland, as a colonial society, was a highly diverse society. It encompassed native Gaelic Irish populations, Old English communities who were descended from Norman settlers, New English colonists, as well as other migrant groups like French Huguenots who made Ireland their home in the 17th century. Where evidence permits, we are paying particular attention to recovering the voices and experiences of Gaelic Irish women, a group who have traditionally been missing or marginalised in historical narratives of 16th and 17th century Ireland. The project takes advantage of the so-called digital windfall, that is the increasing availability of digitised manuscripts and archival records, as well as the new computational tools from AI to knowledge graph technologies that allow us to interrogate these records in new and novel ways. We use techniques such as handwritten text recognition and natural language processing to find and connect traces of women's lives scattered across many different archives and records. Ultimately, we aim to bring these pieces of information together in a knowledge graph, which is in essence a networked map that links people, places, events, and sources. And once complete, the Voices knowledge graph will offer a powerful new way to explore Ireland's past at scale, while also ensuring that women's experiences are preserved and made visible. So having said all that, our core objectives are really threefold: to recover and document women's roles and experiences during moments of upheaval and in peacetime, to harness AI and knowledge graph technology to represent relationships, agency, and historical presence, and to place women's perspectives at the centre of the narrative of early modern Ireland, rather than treating them as marginal or exceptional figures. And we begin from a very simple observation. that the early modern archive was a highly gendered archive. Even in large and rich collections, women often appear only in passing, if at all, and their lives are rarely traceable across documents. This is particularly true for non-elite women. Their presence, as the scholar Pat Palmer notes, is often reduced to, quote, fugitive sightings. And this is especially true the further you move down the social hierarchy. So while women from elite family backgrounds appear very frequently, those from lower social backgrounds are harder often to find in the records. This is a real challenge, of course, in terms of reconstructing the lives of those so-called ordinary women. And down here at the bottom of the screen, you will see a table representing some of the key sources that the Voices project is engaging with, and some of the percentage statistics on the percentage of women in those sources, or the percentage of records produced by women. So, for example, the 1641 depositions, out of a total of around 8,000 depositions, we know that roughly 12% were written by women. The prerogative court of Armagh wills, we know that roughly 11% wills proved within that court during the time period we're interested in were wills written by women. And while the Court of Chancery pleadings, the figure is slightly higher at 21%, and this figure represents the percentage of pleadings by female plaintiffs within the Court of Chancery in the 17th century. So a second challenge then for us in relation to the archive is that early modern manuscripts are what we might call messy data. To modernise, many 17th century documents can appear almost illegible. Early modern handwriting varied enormously from one individual to another, and even within a single document, there can be varying degrees of legibility. In addition, spelling, the use of abbreviations, and capitalization were far from standard. And there was also considerable variation in the style of handwriting employed during the time period which we designate as early modern, from court and secretary hand to italic. All of this makes transcription, or at least traditional modes of transcription, a very slow and labour-intensive process, and one that can be highly prone to error. So just to give you a sense of some of the manuscript sources that the Voices project is working with currently, on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see one of the pleadings from the Irish Court of Chanceries, which I've already mentioned, held in the National Archives of Ireland in Dublin. And our colleague Daniel Patterson is working on this collection currently. In the middle, you will see a will by a woman by the name of Deborah Williams, who was a widow living in Dublin City towards the end of the 17th century, and her will is contained within the large collection of wills in the National Archives in Kew. And on the right-hand side is the collection of manuscripts which we will be concerned with today, which is known as the funeral entries, which are a series of manuscripts held in the National Library of Ireland in Dublin. And really then our challenge is, how do we go about transforming this messy manuscript material into manageable, processable data to explore women's lives in early modern Ireland? And how do we do this at scale? So what Felix and I will showcase today really is our experimental work on the funeral entries, a series of manuscripts preserved in the Genealogical Office of the National Library of Ireland. Compiled by the Ulster King of Arms between the late 16th and the early 19th centuries, these records are unparalleled in their breadth and detail. They contain over 3,000 pages across 17 volumes and record the deaths of around 3,800 individuals, men and women, living in Ireland in the 16th and 17th centuries. For each entry, they note not only the date and the place of the death, but they also record details such as social rank, family ties, marriage alliances, children, and place of burial. So to just give you a short flavour for the type of material contained in one of these funeral entries, you will see here on screen the funeral entry of Joan, the daughter of George Lodge. And the entry records that she was daughter of George Lodge, had to her first husband, Rafe Grimedick, farmer of the customs of the port of Dublin, who was father by her to Richard, Henry, George, Thomas, and Charles, also to Mary, who herself was wife to George Lowe, clerk in the Common Pleas, Hester, and Martha. She had to her second husband, Edward Smith, pensioner, by whom she had no issue. She died the 25th of April, 1607, and is buried in Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin. So that's just to give you a flavour of the type of information and the depth of information that is contained even in one single funeral entry. So while at first glance the funeral entries may appear as simply bureaucratic documents, administrative tools that were designed to verify genealogical claims and uphold the social order of heraldic and colonial Ireland, but when we read them with a historical and gendered lens, they become something far richer. Because lineage and inheritance, of course, depended on descent, women appear throughout the records as daughters, wives, mothers, and widows, as we've just seen in the case of the previous slide. Their presence is often framed in relation to others, but that relational role was fundamental to how families were structured and remembered. And the scale of their inclusion in the funeral entries collection is striking. Around 42% of the entries within this collection concern women, an unusually high proportion by early modern standards, and much higher than some of the earlier statistics I quoted. So really together, these records allow us to trace not just individual biographies, but the broader social worlds, kinship networks, and community connections that shaped women's lives in early modern Ireland. If we zoom in on just one volume of the funeral entries, which is volume 3, GOMS 66, the potential of this source for women's history becomes even clearer. Our preliminary analysis has identified 149 women within this volume who died between roughly 1600 and 1620. So that represents about 38% of all of the entries across this volume. Again, quite a striking proportion by early modern standards. So even this single manuscript volume offers a vivid snapshot of early 17th century Irish society. A world that was shaped by urban life, by the interplay of Gaelic Irish, Old English, and New English identities, and by the persistence of Catholic faith and belief within an increasingly Protestant state. The women recorded here range from titled ladies to the wives and daughters of Dublin aldermen, sheriffs, and professionals. Most entries cluster around Dublin and the so-called Pale, the area around Dublin that was under direct Crown control and was the centre of English colonial power in early modern Ireland. But these women's family networks stretch into Kilkenny, Cork, Louth, and Meath, showing how civic and landed elites were linked through marriage and kinship. Multiple marriages are very often common. Mary Grey, for example, married 3 times, twice to successive mayors of Dublin, her life tracing the circulation of civic power among interconnected Old English families. Winifred Toto, the daughter of a Florentine artist, married Sir Charles Calthorpe, the Attorney General of Ireland, a reminder of Dublin's rich cosmopolitan character. And as an interesting side note in relation to Winifred, her artist father was one Anthony Toto, who was a member of King Henry VIII's Privy Chamber and sergeant painter at the Tudor court. These brief but information-rich entries show women as connective figures within genealogical, social, and confessional networks. Their marriages knit families together across regions and sometimes across religious divides. Occasional unions between Old English Catholic and New English Protestant households hint at the complex social negotiations of early 17th century Ireland. So, having seen what the funeral entries can reveal about women's roles, at least briefly, the next challenge is how we actually take this kind of material and make it usable at scale. And for that, I will now pass over to my colleague Felix, who is going to talk to you about how we're tackling some of the transcription and text processing steps of that task. So over to you, Felix.
Thank you very much, Bronagh. So I'm going to be elaborating on the different ways in which we have been working with the funeral entries and the challenges that we have faced in doing so. Until now, these manuscripts have existed as digital images on the National Library of Ireland's website, but they were neither transcribed nor text searchable. Our first step was therefore to transform these digital artifacts into processable text. Since the funeral entries are a manuscript collection, we used the handwritten text recognition software Transcribus. Many of you may already be familiar with Transcribus and its functionalities. This software serves to automatically decipher and transcribe to manuscript sources. It allows users to mark up regions of text from which the transcriptions can be generated. Even this first step, however, was complicated by the material intricacies of the funeral entries manuscripts, which in turn had implications for their automatic processing through Transcribus. The first challenge we faced is that a single funeral entries page can contain anywhere between 1 and 13 entries. The left page here shows a single funeral entry, while the one on the right contains 10. On top of this, many of the entries are accompanied by additional information, either a heading that contains the last name of the deceased, marginalia, a heraldic shield, or all three of these. As a result, we designed a tagging protocol to keep each entry separate while correctly capturing all the information we need. Transcribus lets users label text regions with a set of tags that can be activated or customized at any time. We decided that we would distinguish between individual funeral entries by creating at least one heading and one paragraph region per entry, with a paragraph region containing the entry's main body of text. Where one or more marginalia exist, we also captured these and labeled them accordingly. Because drawings or symbols, such as the coats of arms, can interfere with the text recognition, we decided it was best to avoid capturing them when marking up the text regions, which was quite labor intensive. That being said, the system allowed us to work around some of the material complexity of the funeral entries. For example, when headings or paragraphs follow each other, it means there are several headings, or that an entry spans multiple pages. When there is no heading or body in the actual manuscript, we still created empty text regions to mark the presence of an entry, as you can see on the 2 pages I showed you earlier. Another challenge we have faced is that the hands used within the collection vary widely, and this even across a single volume. Transcribus has a range of open access models that can be used by researchers, and also gives users the opportunity to train their own model to deal with their specific sources. Given the multiple hands present in the corpus, we decided not to train a custom model, but instead opted to use one of Transcribus's supermodels called Titan. Yet, despite being one of the platform's most powerful models, Titan is not infallible and has struggled with some of the complexity of the manuscript material that we are processing. This effect is compounded by the presence of Irish names and places in the manuscripts. Some of these have posed a problem for the text recognition, presumably because the Titan model would not have been trained on Irish language data. This is not helped by the fact that some of these names may even have been difficult for English-speaking scribes to spell. Can you click, Brenna, please? Thank you. Some examples include Conall O'Farrell and Terence O'Dempsey, who are transcribed into Cornell O'Ferriff and Terence et Dempsey. It is worth emphasizing that not all Irish names were mistranscribed. The name of Honora Ní Caffrey, who I will return to shortly, was correctly transcribed by Titan. Ní here is an Irish language patronymic given to women, which means daughter of. An Irish language transcribers model was released last year by the University of Galway and New York University, but it is a monolingual model that was developed using late 19th century newspaper sources, meaning it would probably still struggle with the funeral entries manuscripts. All of the above challenges combined means that we have some very good transcriptions and some poor transcriptions. An example of a good transcription is this one concerning Mary Lady Terrell, daughter of a mayor of Dublin and wife to another. She died in 1604, is buried in St. Auden's Church in Dublin, and the individuals she was connected to are very clearly identifiable. A poorer transcription would be that of the funeral entry of Isabel, daughter of Daniel Molyneux, whose cause of death was not, as transcribers reports, by porridge. Rather, an accurate rendering is that she died young. As it stands, virtually all our transcriptions contain at least some errors. Nevertheless, they are workable to a certain extent. While another layer of pre-processing will be added further down the line, the raw transcriptions have been used for early experimentation with different natural language processing tools, and in particular, named entity recognition. Natural language processing is the branch of artificial intelligence that focuses on natural or human language. Simply put, it refers to the process of using computers and algorithms to analyze text. Computers are very good with numbers, but less so with words. Today, however, advances in machine learning means that models can learn to identify patterns across contexts and datasets. These models must be trained, but once the training is completed, they can fulfill a wide range of tasks, such as recognizing syntax, topics, or grammatical dependencies. Named entity recognition, or NER for short, is a subfield of natural language processing which, as the name implies, serves to recognize named entities within text. Named entities can represent a range of things: people, cities or countries, dates, numbers, currencies, works of art, and so forth. Models can be taught to recognize one or more of such entities, but with some degree of error. An accuracy of over 90% is usually considered to be state-of-the-art, with some domain-specific models achieving up to 97% accuracy. But what's it for? NER can be used for a variety of purposes, including distant reading. An NER model can be deployed to rapidly gloss over text, or several hundreds of them, and identify relevant data points. This is what we hope to achieve at Voices, and it is why we're exploring various ways to transcribe, extract, annotate, and leverage knowledge from historical sources at scale. As you can see from this data pipeline, we're currently experimenting with the funeral entries to transform the text curated through automatic transcriptions into an organized data format using named entity recognition. As of yet, however, there are no publicly available NER models for early modern English. Instead, we have had to rely on models trained on 20th and 21st century data. These models can struggle with historical text that contain typographical conventions and spellings they would not have been exposed to. This is especially true when working with messy data, such as the funeral entries transcriptions. And of course, NER itself is neither faultless nor magical. It can miss entities and is by itself not always enough to establish relationships between them, such as the family ties that permeate the funeral entries. As a result, we try to curate the data in formats that are easier for these NER models to analyze, and always have a human in the loop validating the results, as well as adding information where necessary. This being said, the early experimentation with off-the-shelf models on the funeral entries has delivered some promising results. Around 90% of entities were correctly captured either in part or fully, and this despite transcription errors. We obviously do have to exercise some caution. Many funeral entries, for example, lack the first names of the deceased or their widows. When names are present, they are often abbreviated or can be incorrectly transcribed by a transcribus, which can in turn throw off the NER. Using distant reading is about finding the right balance between efficiency and accuracy. In the case of Voices, what has become most obvious is that the women we are studying, who are already difficult to recover from the historical record, can be further silenced by the different layers of our technology stack. For example, take the following automatic transcription from the funeral entries manuscript GOMS66. This transcription is of very high quality. The Titan model recognizes that some words must represent abbreviations, and is even able to correctly choose when to expand LO into Lord or Loftus, The expansions here are signaled by the square brackets. However, it would appear that other abbreviations were not included in the training of the model. The name Margaret appears throughout this volume as MARGT, but is never expanded by Titan. This matters because when processing this transcription through named entity recognition, MARGT is not recognized, as you can see in the black box below. The same is true for Jane Purdon. Her name is the only one to be rendered with a lowercase letter by Transcribus, making her recognition by the NER more difficult. AI tools are only as good as the data that they are trained on. Being aware of this limitation is even more important when integrating multiple AI-powered tools into a research workflow. Since we did not train our own Transcribus or NER models for voices, we were not able to ensure that training data was gender sensitive. This kind of curation is crucial. Transcribus, for example, requires 25 to 75 pages of historical materials to train a model. However, the historical record is generally skewed against women, meaning extra attention would be needed to train a gender-inclusive model. And as I mentioned earlier, such limitations of machine learning models and their training data are also true with regards to Irish names. See, for example, the following funeral entry concerning Mary Babington, Dowager Lady Dunsany, who was allegedly murdered by her servant Honora Ní Caffrey, who we have encountered already. This is a rare case in which the manuscript documents a crime and the response to it. Ní Caffrey was burned for the murder of her mistress, which was the punishment for petty treason by women. Even more interestingly, the entry also explains that Ní Caffrey's name was cleared post-mortem after a knave, or thug, confessed to the murder. This knave remains unidentified, so he is evidently not recognized as a named entity. Honora's last name, however, is not correctly picked up by the NER, despite being correctly transcribed by Titan, likely due to the fact that Ní Caffrey is not an English language surname. We hence face similar problems using NER as with using Transcribus. We need to work around the fact that the data we are deploying these models on is very different from the data that was used to train them, not only historical, but also containing instances of Irish names and place names. In a similar vein, you can see that the barony of Dunsany is incorrectly identified as a person rather than a location. And I will now hand back over to you, Bronagh, for some final remarks.
Thanks very much, Felix. I'm just going to wrap up with a few short concluding remarks. And really what I hope has come across from today's presentation is that this project and our work on the funeral entries is about much more than applying digital tools to historical material. At its core, really, it's an attempt to rethink how we access, interpret, and narrate the past. The funeral entries remind us that even sources created for bureaucratic or genealogical purposes can, when read differently, offer profound insights into women's roles, relationships, and experiences in early modern Ireland. They also allow us to recover something of the texture of women's lives, not as marginal figures, but as central actors in the making of families, communities, and confessional and cultural identities. And they challenge us to consider how the historical record itself was created and whose stories it preserves. But unlocking that potential depends on our ability to bridge the gap between manuscript and machine. The work we have shared here today, from handwritten text recognition to named entity recognition, is a first step towards building the tools and data needed to explore these sources at scale. Looking ahead, we plan to refine our transcriptions through curation workflows, which will in turn improve the accuracy of the NER, particularly around Irish names and gendered language. All of this, we hope, will allow us to continue to develop the Voices knowledge graph. Ultimately, our goal is to create an interconnected, searchable resource that not only recovers women's histories, but also transforms how we study early modern Ireland, enabling new kinds of questions, new patterns, and new voices to emerge from the archive. In that sense, digital methods are not an end in themselves, but a means of expanding historical consciousness, helping us to read old sources in new ways, to challenge entrenched narratives, and to write women back into the story of Ireland's complex early modern past. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you both so much for such a stimulating presentation. We have incredibly a huge amount of time for questions, which is fabulous. Thank you for being so so succinct and straight on that half hour. So I'm going to kick it straight over to Kelvin, who's put in the chat. Kelvin, are you all right if I read it out, or would you rather ask them yourselves? I'll go with reading. Okay. Super. All right. Can I ask how the team used unique identifiers to backtrack from the derived data to the precise locations of the primary source entries?
Yep. I can take that one. So we have labeled each. Well, we obviously have the names of all the manuscripts, so the GOMS 66, GOMS 65, etc., etc. And for each of these manuscripts, we have labeled the pages per folio. So 1R, 1V, the way you would label early modern manuscripts. And then when we have put these through Transcribus, Transcribus treats each page individually and gives you the option of adding this page number to the particular file that you are transcribing. So whenever we export these files, we have unique identifiers for each page located within each manuscript that we can refer back to verify, for example, the quality of the transcription.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thank you. BR puts in the chat, can you please describe your endpoint knowledge graph and what software you will be using?
So the knowledge graph, we are building in collaboration with the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, which is an ongoing project that is trying to map out various sources across our Irish history through an online platform. I don't know what software exactly is being used, but the ontology that we're using is CIDOC CRM, CIDOC CRM, which is an ontology that's used quite extensively in cultural heritage.
And just to say that we have a series of person schemas that we're currently populating to be able to harness the data that we're capturing within the funeral entries and across lots of other corpuses that the project is working on, that will ultimately then end up in the Voices knowledge graph, which, as Felix said, is linked to a much larger knowledge graph, which forms part of the VRTI project. So that's all part of our data pipeline in terms of moving from raw manuscript through to automated transcription, curation of that transcription, and then moving that data into structured format in order for it to be fed ultimately into the knowledge graph. Unfortunately, none of our knowledge graph engineers on the team are here present on the call, or they might have been able to give a more extensive description, but I'm hoping that at least covers some of the key points around the knowledge graph.
Thank you so much. Did anyone want to jump in with a question at this point? Norma, fabulous. Fascinating project and a great presentation. May I ask how or why did you select the particular collections for analysis?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question, Norma. Thanks very much. So the project is fundamentally about women's lives, and we're thinking about in terms of life and death, and also war and peace. So I suppose that those kind of major themes are some of the ways in which we've gone about selecting our big collections that we will focus on. So obviously funeral entries and wills are a very important source in terms of giving us an insight into women's lives at the point of death, as it were. And then I suppose another important feature of our decision making was around what was digitally available and what was not digitally available. So in the case of the 1641 depositions, for example, which really captures that wartime experiences of women, that material has already been subject to quite a lot of processing, in the sense that there are already very highly accurate and curated transcripts available from that collection, and they are also very valuable for insights into the lives of women. So that was, I suppose, one of the defining decision-making factors around a corpus such as that. The Court of Chancery then is, unique in terms of the survival of court records for early modern Ireland, and it really does give us a rich insight into kind of peacetime narratives of women's lives in a way that we don't find in other types of sources. I should say as well that for early modern Ireland, we're not exactly drowning in surviving collections either. And the whole purpose and premise of the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland project is to recover a lot of the material, early modern and beyond, that was destroyed during the 1922 burning of the Record Office. So in some ways we have been guided by what survives, but we've also been guided by principles around what's available digitally, and also what makes sense in terms of the project goals of recovering women's lives and experiences, as I say, in both life and in death.
Thank you. Mara has a question.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. Wonderful project. Congratulations. As wonderful, wonderful work. And so much work has gone already into this. I think my question really builds up on what you've just discussed. How do you face the challenge of the archival silences? How are you going to address that? And can actually the project that you're developing help us in addressing the issue more in general and for other projects?
Thanks, Mara. I'm happy to take that. In relation to how do we go about addressing archival silences, I mean, I think this is a fundamental challenge for women's history, particularly for the early modern period. And especially for early modern Ireland, as I say, there is a real dearth of sources that survive for the period to begin with, and then trying to locate women within those sources is obviously a major challenge. I think fundamentally being very aware of that bias in the source to begin with is an important point to raise, and it's something that we've obviously been very aware of on this project. I think another point to be very aware of, and I think this has come through in what Felix was discussing around the NER, is the propensity of the digital tools to add another layer of silence to women's voices and those archival silences. So I think coming at it from very much a gendered perspective and a gendered lens, we're very, very keenly aware of the potential for undermining further the presence of women in the archives. How do we overcome that? I think it's certainly a challenge, and I think Felix touched on some of that in relation to being very open about the challenges around some of the out-of-the-box NER models, for example, and how if we want to kind of be very, very careful about the way in which they're performing their analysis, it really is important that we train them to be sensitive to those silences. So I'm not sure exactly how we achieve that, but I think at least having awareness of the complexity and the challenges not only with the sources, but then with the actual tools that we're deploying to analyze the sources, at least goes some way to addressing some of those issues. But it's certainly a very complex task, and I'm by no means purporting to have all of the answers to those questions. Felix, did you want to add in anything there?
Nope. Said it all.
Pass it over. We've got a great couple of questions in the chat, so I'm gonna go for Brunilda's first. My PhD research focuses on the economic and social role of women in early 20th century Albania. Do you think similar digital methodologies could be applied to Balkan contexts where archival data are limited?
I can take that one. I guess it depends what you mean by digital methodologies. Obviously, we today have focused on NER and natural language processing. So if you have access to sources in a digital format, whether manuscript or printed, and if there are NLP models for Albanian, then I suppose that could be a possibility. But if you don't have access to those those sources, sorry, digitally, then there might be other digital methodologies that you could rely on. But natural language processing or NER would be more complicated unless you have transcriptions of these sources.
I'd also just like to add in that I think it depends on what the archival data is that you're talking about. Obviously, 20th century context, you're more likely to be dealing with, I would imagine, more printed material, perhaps. So that, of course, makes a difference in terms of what we're doing here is very much geared towards the manuscript material and being able to apply digital tools to kind of messy manuscript data. But I know certainly, and Jane, I know you're here, so feel free to jump in. But a big part of Voices is to create transferable models that can be transferable across different geographical locations, but also even different time periods as well. So that is a key aim of the project. But again, that does come with a level of complexity because there are very specific contexts to be understood for certain sources and certain time periods, and especially when it comes to recovering the lives of women. Jane, did you want to jump in there?
I don't know if I can, if I've got it.
Go ahead, you can.
Well done, Bronagh. Well done, Felix. It's lovely to hear you guys talking about this. So that is the goal, that we will create technologies that are transferable across geography and across chronologies as well. Because a lot of these algorithms and the okay, it's domain specific at one level, but in other ways it's very, very shareable. So it's simply to say you're absolutely right, Bronagh, and that is the intention. Whether we achieve it or not, I don't know. But I should say everything that we're doing in Voices will be made fully accessible to anybody who wants to share. It's all going to be completely open access.
Thanks so much, Jane.
That's terrific. Good to know. Well, I think Finn's question almost follows up a little bit on that. So apologies if I missed this, especially in the queue, I would have been typing. Okay. Since this project will quite radically broaden access to difficult manuscript material, could you expand a little on your plans for supporting entry-level students or researchers who might access or stumble across this work, but could struggle with the complexities and false friends in the early modern context?
I'm happy to try to answer that question, Finn. Thanks very much. Yeah, absolutely. As Jane said, like the ultimate goal here is to make a lot of this material, or certainly the vast majority of this material, open access. And we will do that in various ways. Certainly our collaboration with the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland has enabled some of that material to be digitally platformed and is now, digitally accessible to a public audience. And certainly in terms of, dealing with the complexities of the early modern context, I think there will be huge potential for us to expand our online presence. We obviously have a website currently, but I think the plan is to, expand that significantly in terms of making available the Voices knowledge graph, but also making available resources and tools and case studies that will help to inform general public users, but also students and researchers who are eager to kind of delve more in detail into some of this material. I'm thinking about Material Culture of Wills project. I think Laura Sanga was on the call, or maybe she's still there. And I know they have done some really excellent work in terms of making resources and toolkits available via their website for researchers who are interested in these particular topics. And certainly that's something that Voices aims to achieve as well in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of, you know, that broader piece around students that might be interested, and kind of informing them in terms of various case studies around individual women or individual time periods, and kind of, yeah, because obviously early modern Ireland is a complex case study. So I think having any of those kind of resources and toolkits in place will be hugely valuable.
Thank you. Felix, I didn't know, did you want to jump in on that?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Go
no.
ahead.
Okay, super. Oh, and I see that Laura has even replied on the chat. So, yes, I'm still here. Great to hear that everything will be shared open access and about these plans to develop resources to help the materials, to use the materials produced. Fabulous. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to circle back to a question from BR, which says, how are you structuring your data to handle the complication that women's names change every time they marry, i.e., a woman who marries 3 times can appear to be 3 different women when in fact she is one? It would seem you have the key to this headache for so many researchers in your data. Can you share with us that key, please?
I can take that one. You point to a very, very important problem that we've been facing. And so in our knowledge graph, we generate unique keys for each individual or each place. And usually we try where possible when it comes to women to have these based on how the women would identify themselves. So say in a will, if a will says Bronagh McShane, then we try to preserve that name, whether it's their maiden name, whether it's their married name, and then we link what we call stub entries for their husbands, whether it's just the one husband, whether it's multiple husbands. Each of them is recorded as a data point in relation to that woman. And so if a source mentions a particular woman under a particular name, and later mentions that this woman was married to someone else in the past, we're able to retrace that data. So that's how we've been trying to handle this problem. It's a very, very good question. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Brenna.
Just to say, I think Felix has captured that quite well, but I think this is a complex question as well, and I don't think we want to purport to have, completely resolve the issue, but certainly we have come up with a resolution that I suppose fits our purposes in terms of populating what we call person schemas for upload into the knowledge graph. And actually, it's funny that this question should come up because just recently we had quite a lot of communication around this question of women's surnames and whether the primary surname within the person schema should be the maiden name or the married name. And this created quite a bit of discussion and conversation in our team. And I think really what it demonstrated was how sometimes these tools and these ways of modeling data can be very much skewed towards men's lives. And that is true of, I suppose up to now, the person schema has largely modeled notable male figures in Irish history because it has drawn on a resource called the Dictionary of Irish Biography, which is predominantly male, the entries in that dictionary, and predominantly notable individuals. And I think that whole concept of notability is very problematic for women's history. And so I think that's where you kind of tend to see a bit of a clash between the technology and, certain structures that it employs, and actually the reality of trying to represent the true complexities of women's lives. So as Felix said, one way we have achieved this is by adding these husbands' IDs as stub entries. But again, I think it is being very attuned and very aware of where the technology can fall short, and making sure that we're not replicating those biases within our data sets.
And it might be good to answer Anne-Marie Harvard's question as well. So to follow up slightly on the question regarding women's names, how are you dealing with disambiguation where multiple people share the same name? So this is obviously also a problem that we've been facing as of now, because the project has, started only in the last 2 years, and VRTI has only worked with limited amounts of data as well. The way that they've been keeping track is by manually checking for each name, whether, there's a duplicate, whether someone shares the same name, or whether really it's the same person being referred to across two different sources. But as our data set grows, we are planning on automating this process slightly. So have have it flagged basically, to say, hey, these people share a name. Are they the same person or not?
Thank you very much. We've got about 5 minutes left. I don't know if anyone has any further questions that they'd like to either put in the chat or raise their hand. Just congratulations at this point. In which case, I might just jump in and ask a question, if I can take the prerogative here. I wanted to ask you about CDOC CRM because ostensibly you're choosing to use something which is wonderfully non-hierarchical, and has all of these extensible kind of qualities to it, which allow you to have relationships which are, ever kind of nebulous. But ostensibly the data you're working with is quite traditionally hierarchical, we might say, because it's about, kind of husband, wife, this kind of more lineage type relationship. I wondered if you were anticipating building in some kind of elements of alternate relationships by using CDOC CRM, taking advantage of that functionality, potentially as part of the way of revealing women and kind of some of those hidden connections in the data.
Thanks very much, Alexandra. As I said, it's a shame any of our knowledge graph engineers aren't here because they will give you a much more extensive answer. But to say that from the knowledge that I do have around the CDOC CRM model, the idea is that it is quite flexible. And I suppose it has been chosen because of its flexibility and because of the ability to be able to add on additional features, if you like. And that's obviously particularly valuable then for us in terms of adding on some of the complexity of women's lives in particular. So for example, we want to be able to model certain events that are perhaps unique in the context of what we're doing. So for example, modeling events such as massacres or, death as it occurred in the 1641 depositions. The CDOC CRM will allow us to, use what's there, but also to add to it in a way that is valuable from the Voices Project perspective, but also is valuable from a women's history perspective. So I think really it's kind of the flexibility that's inbuilt within it, is the reason why it was kind of chosen in the first instance by our knowledge graph engineers, and they reassure us that it is usable in the context of what we want to achieve.
That's fabulous. I don't see any more questions, so can I follow up? Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you finally to maybe reflect on your historical roles, in the sense that you've given us a really lovely account of the processes that you're going through and how things change and what you've kind of encountered along this, I guess, digital journey. And I just wanted to ask you, as people who are probably at one stage in some point more traditional historians, not that digital history is anything kind of more outrageous at this point. We're very institutionalized, I'd say, in some ways, but do you feel that doing this digital history, engaging with digital tools, digital technologies, digital methods, has actually made you read much more carefully as traditional historians?
Yes, very. I mean, I can't speak for Bronagh, but personally, very, very much so. Even, like reading reading a transcription that was generated by Transcribus. I worked a bit with Transcribus in the past, and it was on data that was a bit less messy than the funeral entries. And I thought, oh, this is great. I barely have to do any cleaning. Whereas, with the funeral entries, I might read the same entry on 3 different days and realize that what I thought was just, some random punctuation actually is a mistranscribed name. So I would definitely say that it's made me much more careful, especially using NER as well, and approaching data like big data from a distance. It's been very interesting in pushing me to rethink how I approach my sources.
And just to reflect on that, I would say that from my perspective, doing digital history has certainly made me even more sure of the fact that there is really no substitute for traditional methods. And I think really the magic point is when those two things combine. So I think one without the other, there's something perhaps missing, but I think bringing them together, that distant reading approach combined with the kind of close historical analysis that historians more traditionally are engaged with, I think when those two elements merge, is when we can really see some advances within our particular fields. And really that's, I think, ultimately the goal of the project is, on the one hand, to be doing a lot of this big scalable work, but at the same time to be zooming in and producing the kind of analysis that is needed to kind of move the historical narrative forward.
Thank you so much. We've reached our time. I want to thank you both, Felix and Bronagh, again for this wonderful presentation. I think everyone here is quite enthralled by the project, and will keep checking up on it. The last thing for me to do is to remind everyone that we have another seminar coming up soon. So if I just share my screen quickly, we have on the 4th of November, the De Swart Prize seminar, which this year is going to the paper Female Voices on Stage, Finding Patterns in Lottery Rhymes of the Late Medieval and Early Modern Low Countries with and Without AI. So please do join us again. It will be online. This time it's a lunchtime event. We're trying to vary our timings a little bit between lunchtime and early evening. So we do hope you can join us then. And I'd like to thank all of the participants. I'd like to thank all of the guests for attending, and hope we see you soon at the next IHR Digital History seminar. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thanks very much, Alexandra, and thanks to everyone for the fantastic questions.
Thank you again.